Hi, this is Father Bill W. here in Austin, Texas, and I want to welcome you to the podcast. I'm an Episcopal priest in long-term recovery. If I make it next month, I'll be celebrating 48 years, and that's with a lot of help from a great many people in the fellowship. Many of them have passed on, but I'm very, very grateful for having known them and for the direction that they gave me in my life. At about 20 years sober, a lot of you have heard this before, but it's really important. At 20 years sober, I was in AA and really needed to go deeper in my recovery. And that was when I discovered the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. And being an addict, I dove in and have done a lot of research and study. And the point of these podcasts is to share some of that information with you in the hope that it will be helpful to you in your own recovery. And at this point, I did want to ask for help. And, of course, being an alcoholic, it's never easy to ask for help. So don't do this often. But we need to know how it is that you receive your information. What's the best way to help you get a hold of some of this information, whether it's through the newsletter or workshops or Facebook or whatever it might be. So in the show notes at the end of the podcast is the description of the podcast. That right there, we're going to have a link to what they call Surveymonkey. And it's just a chance to take a 1 minute down and dirty information dump on how you get your information and how we can best be of service. So if you do me a favor and go to that and fill that out, it would really be a tremendous help to us. By way of announcements, we've got a two-way prayer workshop coming up on the 14th of November, and hope you'll attend that if you haven't been to one already. And if you have, then refer a friend. Let them know about this two-way prayer process, because it really is a life changer. And if you want a flyer on that, you can reach me at twowayprayer@gmail.com. I'd be happy to send it to you. And if you'd send it along to your friends, that'd help make sure that we get a good number of people in the audience that day. It's on a Saturday morning, and I'm looking forward to it. Going to do another one on the second Saturday in December, and so we got that information is also on the flyer. So with that all out of the way, let's pick up on this episode. And if you've been following, we've been doing a series on psychic change. We've tried to look at it from any number of different angles. Last episode, we had Professor William Miller on, who did a book really on the subject. He called it quantum change instead of psychic change, but it's really about the same thing. And this is a subject that's been tremendously important to me. Before I became a priest, I worked for many years as an alcohol and drug counselor. And I knew that if I could help a patient to really get in touch with the spiritual dimension of recovery, that his or her chances of staying sober were going to be a lot greater. And so part of my work, big part of it, was helping to break through some of the barriers, the obstacles that stood in the way of finding that relationship with God that was going to change their lives and see them through for the long haul. Had a nice note from some recovering folks I worked with over there in Baton Rouge back in the 70s. Son of a gun, they're still sober and still grateful and still helping other people. So this spiritual approach really works, and we're all about trying to get information out there to help break that down and make it simpler to understand. So in this closing episode of the series, what I want to do is walk through a handout that I give out in all of the two-way prayer workshops that I do. But I'm usually rushed during the course of that. I got 2 hours to give the information, and it it never seems like I have enough time. So I'm gonna take this time in this closing episode to kind of break down that handout for you. If you have been to a workshop, hopefully you still have it. Again, if you don't have it, I'm going to quote from it pretty extensively. Happy to send it to you. Again, write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I'll get it out to you right away. Don't try to take notes on this, particularly if you're driving. Okay, not recommended. So basically, three quotes on the handout that I want to cover. And the first one is from William James, and he is so important in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he doesn't get too much attention. Not that, he's a heady Harvard professor, and he's quoted in the big books. He's referred to in the big book. Wilson even went so far as to call him one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think what he was really referring to there is how fundamental he was in the first step and in the 12th step, because the first step really opens the door to a spiritual solution because there's no other way out. And then the 12th step talks about having had this experience, having arrived at the spiritual solution. And that's what James was all about. He was about the tremendous impact that a spiritual experience can have on an individual. And so let me read his quote, and it's going to be a lot easier than it sounds. So don't get too discouraged with this. But he's talking about what is this psychic change? What is this spiritual experience, as it's referred to in the program? So James says this. He says, to be converted, to be regenerated, to receive grace, to experience religion, to gain an assurance, are so many phrases which denote the process, gradual or sudden, by which a self, hitherto divided, and I want you to hang on to that little phrase, a self that was divided and consciously wrong, inferior, and unhappy. So this is untreated alcoholism. If you're living in that state, you are feeling wrong, inferior, and unhappy. Many of us know it well. So it's the process, gradual or sudden, by which this self, this divided self, becomes unified, becomes consciously right, superior, and happy. How? And this is the key. How? In consequence of its firmer hold upon religious, and you can call that spiritual, realities. So that's what James is saying is that this divided self that people have, if we can overcome the division and make a breakthrough into the spiritual dimension of life, which the ego kind of denies, you see. See, the ego says, I've got the answers. Look to me, look to me. You don't need to look to God. You need to look to me. And there's the division. There's the division of this ego self that is really kind of at war with itself. So there's that James quote, and that's to me what addiction is really all about. I mean, can you see the divided self that you lived with? I want to drink. I want to be sober. Both are real. Both are going on at the same damn time. And you're getting pulled apart. I want to surrender to God. All right. Yeah, and most of us do, in the course of our recoveries. Not quite sure who this God is, and that's okay in the 12-step process. It's just do the experiment. God, whoever you are, wherever you are. I want to align myself with you. Well, yeah, I want to align myself with you, but you try doing that for a day, and you're going to find another part of yourself that does not want to align itself with God. And there's the division. See, there's the division. So this is the thing, this divided self. If you want to understand psychic change, it's overcoming one day at a time, I would add, this division that lives within each and every one of us. I'm going to throw in another quote here, and this is from the letter of James. And I'm not those of you who've listened to the podcast, I'm not much of an extensive Bible quoter kind of thing, but this one is really important. And the fact that it comes from James is this is another James, the letter of James. Okay, and AA was almost named the James Club, because so much of AA's principles and practices, really, if you read that letter of James, only 5 little chapters in the Bible, it's you're going to see AA all over the place. So see if you don't see it here. This is quoting from this letter of James. All right, and James says this: "If any of you lacks wisdom," so there's that third part of the serenity prayer. Eh? "If you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, without any doubting. For he who doubts, he's like a wave on the sea, driven and tossed by the wind." You ever have days like that? you know? So here I am being driven and tossed about. My inner life is not solid. I'm like a wave, just tossed about by, Jung would say, by the unconscious. Uh, so, so one who doubts is like a wave on the sea, driven and tossed about by the wind. For that man shouldn't think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So there it is again, this double-mindedness. To me, this is the source of my problem, that I am double-minded. Part of me wants this, part of me wants that. And to me, the solution, the spiritual solution to recovery, through recovery rather, is the unification of this divided self. That's what the psychic change is all about. Not that I lose my ego, but that my ego is now rightly related to a greater self. We'll come back to that, all right? So how do we get there? Well, this is, I think, is where the program comes in. This is where the 12 steps come in. And they are a way to arrive at this psychic change, at this spiritual transformation. So I want to look at them very simply through that lens, because it's so easy. And this is the mistake that happens in so many 12-step fellowships and so many people in 12-step recovery. We get locked into the steps. But we do it in a way that we're not understanding what is the transformation, what is the change that the steps are there to bring about. A lot of us wind up worshiping the steps, quoting the steps, playing spiritual billiards with the steps. My 6 refers back to my 3, over to my 9. And my God, you can go a little crazy that way. So I think if you're able to boil it down into 3 simple, not steps, I won't call it steps, but processes that are present in the steps, it might become a heck of a lot clearer. So the way I've done that, and got this kind of through the Oxford Group connection, studying where our program came from. So the first big chunk is connection. So here I am, a tossed about little self, driven by the winds, and I need to connect to something bigger and more powerful than myself. And I start with my alcoholism, because I can't get sober. And I need help if I'm going to get sober. So can I connect with something? So this is where steps 1, 2, and 3 come in. Very simply, is it possible there could be a God, is the question they asked. Well, if there is, could that God do for you what you can't do for yourself? Well, yes. Well, there's 1 and 2 out of the way. 3, ask this God, enter into a relationship with this God, connect with this God, whom I don't understand, but who I believe could be there. And so I turn my will and my life over to his care through an act of the will. Like what they would do is they'd hit their knees, and in the presence of another person, they would make an act of surrender. And the thing that really blew me away was that this was a one-time deal. It wasn't something that I was supposed to do every single day. I'm going to get to that in 11. But it's something powerful that I'm going to do in the presence of another person, usually on my knees, because I get driven to my knees. So there's connection, all right? There's the first 3 steps. Next set of steps, I'm not going to spend much time on these, but it's the correction phase of the program. What is it in me, in this divided self, that gets in the way of this newly found relationship that I'm trying to have with God and with other people? What is the stuff that needs to go? So in 4, I write down the stuff. In 5, I share the stuff. In 6 and 7, I'm willing to let go of all the stuff. 8 and 9, I'm making amends to the people who I have harmed and clean up the stuff, Very simple, very simple. And sometimes they did this within a few days. And we stretch it on for years and years, and without getting to the third part of the program, which is where the new life really starts and begins. And this is the direction phase. So the first part of the program is connection, second part is correction, and the third part is direction. All right? Direction. And this is where my life begins to receive direction. And this is where I want to refer to Robert Johnson's piece. And again, this is on the handout. And the reason I like this is because many of us have heard about this surrender and this alignment with God and this ego reduction. We've heard it, but in the language, it's pure in the big book. None of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession. None of us like this stuff, but we found out that it worked in others, and we began to know that it can work in ourselves. And what did it do? It brought us into a 4th dimension. That's what it says. We've been rocketed into a 4th dimension of experience of which we had never dreamed. So this 4th dimension of experience, and this is one of the reasons I like Johnson, because this is where he picks up. So I'm going to read the quote to you. He says, for most people, the transition from 3-dimensional consciousness to 4th-dimensional consciousness, which is what the big book is talking about, it's exceedingly painful. Medieval Christianity called it the dark night of the soul. Dante called it the journey through hell. 40 days and 40 nights in the desert for Jesus. It was a journey in the belly of the fish for many a hero. I did a podcast a while back called The Hero's Journey, because if you really want to know what recovery is, it's something that's been going on from the time of the Greeks and well before. It is growing up. It is growing up not only physically and not only emotionally, but spiritually. And this is part of our problem today. The hero's journey was usually begun with rites of passage and initiation rites that we don't do in our cultures anymore. And so young men in particular stay little boys. And I think that's going to be the subject of my next series is what I want to really dig into what that hero's journey is and the archetypes of male initiation rites. So anyway, getting lost here. Back to the hero's journey. He says, for a modern man, it's a midlife crisis, or worse, a nervous breakdown, or still worse, physical suicide. The process can be summed up in one sentence. And here's the sentence that blew me away when I first saw it 20 some odd years ago. He says this: it is the relocating of the center of the personality from the ego to a center greater than one's self. The relocation of my center, my spiritual center, away from my normal personality, grounding it now in a center greater than myself. There is the end to the double-mindedness. He says this super-personal center goes by many names. Jung called it the self. It can be called the Christ nature, the Buddha nature, lots of different names for it. And from the ego's perspective, be prepared for this, guys, it appears to be death. I had a spiritual therapist many, many years ago. I went into his group and he said, "Hello, my name is Ted and I'm going to kill you." Appears to be death. It appears to be death. And yet I knew exactly what the guy meant. I knew it, that his job as my therapist was to kill the self in me that was killing my true self. See? So if you want to take the spiritual journey, part of you is going to die. Make no mistake about it. It's not just going to get roughed up a little bit. It really needs to die. And then what? Become resurrected. And that's the spiritual journey, that the change that happens comes about through death and resurrection. Johnson says, and death it is. The ego loses its supremacy. Ego is no longer in charge. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problem. An ego out of control, an ego oversized, oversized, goes through a short time of violent suffering. All right. When someone threatens suicide at this time, Johnson says, I caution him, be very careful to do it without harming your body. A lot of us are suicidal, Well, who the hell do you think we want to kill? I want to kill that self in me that's killing me. I don't really want to die. I mean, there's that double-mindedness again. I don't want to die, but I don't want the pain, but I want to hold on too. See? So this Zen master, he quotes a Zen master, because he says that this really is a form of suicide, and it is best done by the ego. Son of a gun, the ego has to even cooperate in this journey. Then he quotes the Zen master in Los Angeles. I love this one, who once said to his client, why don't you die now and enjoy the rest of your life? And if you're a double-minded man or woman, you know exactly what he's talking about. Why don't you let this battle that's been going on inside of you end and enjoy the rest of your life? Now, that's not killing yourself, but it is putting to rest the self that is killing yourself. And he says this, all right? Now, when the dark night begins to lift, listen to this. One morning, there's an unaccountable touch of joy in the air. It's a bit of the pink cloud period when we come into the program. And son of a gun, I've gone without a drink now for 6 weeks or 6 months, whatever it might be, and I didn't die. I didn't die. Amazing. Not only didn't I die, I'm starting to come to life in areas that I thought I never would come to life. This first contact with the four-dimensional consciousness. From there, one can begin to live from that source of energy. And that's important. It is a source of energy. I'm in touch with God through myself, properly aligned with God. All right? Now, he says less worthy channels for this new energy are fanaticism. Don't become a big book fanatic. Don't become a religious fanatic. See, that's going to screw it up every time. Every time. the ego will take over and operate from that dimension. Looks good, but look out, you know? I mean, why do so many of us run from religion, Because it's not life-giving in so many instances. And so many of us drop out of our recovery programs. Why? Because they become stale. They're not life-giving. Okay? They're not life-giving. And what I've got to do is find a way to get in touch with this life and draw my energy from this life. So less worthy channels, fanaticism, dictatorial religious beliefs, and ego inflations of all kinds. If the new energy flows into such channels, you are quickly sent back for further boiling in the oil of transformation. So, this spiritual transformation process, the psychic change, it ain't a one-shot deal. And be prepared for ongoing encounters with an ego that starts to reinflate. Remember that movie? I think it was called The Terminator. Schwarzenegger, it looked like he was made of mercury. He looked like he's dead, and then the mercury stuff starts crawling back together, and there he is. He's put back in shape. That's my ego. That's my ego. So I have to really watch this sucker. I have to watch it and pray about it and catch it upstream when it's starting to flow into an inflation. See? So this psychic change, how is it experienced? Well, we did in the series, about these blinding white lights and all of this sort of stuff. And what I think the mystics and psychology is going to teach you is those are nice, but that's not the deal. It's not the deal. Oh, if I could just live with that white light shining in my life, and God, it's not the way life is. Well, what is the way life is? It's that my ego can be right-sized. And how is it right-sized? It's right-sized when I am in proper relationship with God, by whatever you call it. And I am here to do what? To do God's will, not my will, not to call him in out of the dugout when I need to hit a home run, but on a daily basis to live my life in right relationship with God. Not too big and not too small, but rightly related and drawing my energy from him now. Sam Shoemaker, who was kind of the spiritual mentor and head of the Oxford Group, he was the mentor to Bill Wilson, head of the Oxford Group in the United States. He says there's 3 levels at which you can live. The first is the level of instinct. We all did that. If it feels good, do it, The second one then is the level of conscience, where, okay, is it right or is it wrong? Well, that's another way to live. But it's still, you can be divided. And the third level, Shoemaker said, is at the level of guidance. It's when I have 2 things that are right and they're both in front of me and I have to make a choice. I can still be driven like by the wind. And this is where that 4th dimension, I believe, is experienced. Not as a blinding white light, but as a peace where I turn gently in my mind, in my prayer, in my heart. I turn to God and I ask for guidance. Guidance. And guidance is the key to the last 3 steps. That God is going to guide us. We will intuitively know. This is what two-way prayer is all about, but it's a different kind of prayer than just ego-based prayer. It's ego alignment prayer, and it's praying for God's guidance and writing down the thoughts that come. That's what two-way prayer is all about. It's that psychic change, and it's living from that place. So, once again, if you could really do me a big favor, go and check the show notes at the where they talk about what this thing is, this podcast, and it'll link you to the Surveymonkey. If you would do that, fill it out, that would be really, really great. And hope this series was helpful to you. It was a lot of fun doing it, and I'm looking forward to the next one. So thank you so much for listening. God bless. Keep coming back.